Assalamu alaikum, you're listening to Unity FM on 93.5. My name is Nassar Mahmood and this is the weekly review show. And I have with me my special guest, Maskeen.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Maskeen. How are you? You okay?
Alhamdulillah, brother. The weather's better this week.
How's your week been?
Alhamdulillah, it's been quite good. Better weather, and it's been interesting. Had a good week at school. Just sort of just surviving without the snow. Yeah. Let's put it that way.
You haven't been set upon by primary school children, have you, this week?
Well, you know, I'm like a local hero now. I mean, my friends have been listening to the show and they're really, really impressed, and they're giving me all the support they can. So
does that mean that people actually listen to us at Unity FM?
You know what?
At Weekly Review Show.
the Weekly Review Show is the show to be. It's the place to be.
Alhamdulillah.
It's where to get the latest
we always think nobody listens to us, but apparently there are some people listening to us.
I didn't realize we actually repeated on a Sunday.
On a Sunday, that's right.
I didn't know that, and
yeah.
I was going to the shop to buy something, and I turned on UTFM and I thought, hello, that sounds like a familiar voice. And I heard your voice and I thought, mashallah, fantastic. And from that, a lot of people tuned in.
Excellent. Sadly, we've had some news yesterday, which is quite distressing. And this is to do with the halal food, which was being sent to prisons, which was supposedly halal, but actually had haram food in there. And this was on the national news, BBC, etc. yesterday. So it's quite distressing because people in prisons particularly are quite vulnerable, and they they're at the mercy of their jailers basically. So whatever they get fed,
they have to eat it.
They have to take it. And this is part of a person's human rights, no matter what crime they've committed, that they're allowed to have their religious dietary needs, their religious needs taken care of in prisons. So it's very sad to hear about what happened with the HFA certified company, and we'll be hearing more about that shortly. But we have a main special guest in the studio with us. His name is Mohammed Saleem. He's a representative of ANSA, which is the Association of Non-Stunned Abattoirs. I hope I got that right. Assalamu alaikum, Saleem. Good to have you in the studio.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you very much for having me back in Unity FM.
If you could just pull those mics that mic towards you. Yes, if you go nearer that mic and just pull it towards you, then hopefully we can hear you better.
Thank you very much for that. Jazakallah.
Yeah, and as I said, thank you for coming in. You've obviously heard the story yesterday. It's very distressing for Muslims to hear this sort of thing. I mean, just before this, we had the story about the horse meat being put into conventional burgers, and that might not have been so alarming for the Muslim community, but this company was Halal Food Association certified, and it had all the necessary requirements, etc., guidelines, etc., supposedly adhered to, but there was pork products, I believe, mixed in with the...
Nassar, brother, if I can take you back, although you're saying that the previous scare of horse meat in beef burgers wasn't an issue, what we found through our investigation as an association, and we believe in this policy, two policies here, is that you are what you eat, and staying silent is not an option for us anymore. As a result of which we've done intensive investigation, and we found that the beef burgers in question also had traces, very high traces of pork DNA in those, and majority of those ended up in the frozen halal products marketed for the Muslim community. Now, I'm not going to mention any multiples for the simple reason that if they've been in the media, we don't want to give them any unnecessary publicity for the sake of it. The issue in question here is that we're quick to point fingers at the certification bodies. Yes, they're at fault. But what we need to realize, before the certification bodies actually kick into action and provide certificates, the moral obligation and a legal obligation lies on the Food Standards Agency to provide, regardless of what faith you belong to, provide you unadulterated food to basically stating what is on the pack should be on the inside. Now, they have breached their own guidelines, as a result of which some of it has been prompted by our associations, some may not. What we are finding now that this is just the tip of the iceberg. You spoke about the prison inmates. There's far more than that. What we're finding distressing is that we've been on the case of our local authorities to ask them what have they done to find out how much of that the adulterated food has actually slipped into the Birmingham area. Now, on one hand, our trading standards officer is telling us that none of that meat has been marketed for the Muslims or the halal trade, where we have evidence in front of us that the companies admit, the ones who produce this admit that it was their products. This is on national news, yet that news hasn't reached our local authorities. One of the largest local authorities in Europe, and I'm happy to say that majority Muslim elected members actually controlling that. Now, this has been brought to the attention of the Public Protection Committee, who I'm happy to say that a few of the non-Muslim elected members have done more for the Muslim community by raising the issue and asking for a further investigation to take place and noting it on the agenda that as far as the legislation for halal is concerned, there's a clear-cut definition that halal is non-stunned. That is what the statutory law states. What we're asking the government, especially the Trading Standards, Food Standards Agency and Ministry of Justice, that it is no business of Food Standards Agency what is halal and what is not halal. What their business should be is looking at the definition of the statutory law as stated, defining the religious method of slaughter. And that quite clearly states that the food for the Jews and Muslims is without stunning. Now, the end product out of that can be called religious slaughter as defined by the law. And I also believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the statutory law is above Parliament. So therefore, it should be above the local authorities. Agreed? Mm-hmm. Now, if that is what the statutory law is stating for the meat to be labelled as religious slaughtered, then why is the Food Standards Agency and the government allowing that particular meat, which is stunned, religious slaughter? Now, they are in breach on a number of points here. A, that the Food Standards' own guidelines, which took over 7 years to produce and over £10 million of British taxpayers' money to come into action, and were first issued in 2003, then reissued again in 2009, making it quite clear that this is a serious issue that concerns the Muslim community. And it mentions there what the trading standards officers should be doing, should be looking for when they do inspections on halal premises. Now, that has been blatantly ignored by authorities across the UK. Why? Because we are not aware of our rights. We as Muslims need to adopt a policy now that silent for us is not an option. It's a legal obligation for the authorities to provide all communities, not just Muslims, having worked and been grown up in the Birmingham community. We know that we work with non-Muslims and they're family members as far as we are concerned. My colleagues look out for me when we go out for a meal, who are Sikhs and Hindus, and make sure that I get what is right according to my religious beliefs.
Great point.
And I do the same for them. So when they find beef in their products, who is to blame? I will not blame the certification agencies, because what we need to do is that we need to send a clear message, and I'm speaking to my elected members now, especially those who are holding offices in government, is that it is our rights that you're representing. It is our votes that have taken you there. We want you to listen to the poor Muslims on the streets, that halal is not an option. It's a way of life for us.
It's a fundamental requirement.
It's a fundamental requirement for Muslims, And we are unconditionally prohibited from consuming pork, handling pork, or going near it. Yet, what has come out into the industry, out of the industry, not by Food Standards Agency's investigation, but by the Ministry of Justice, that a large amount of food that's in the supply chain may well be adulterated with pork proteins. You read whatever media you want. On one hand, the whole world is saying it has entered the halal market, yet we have the trading standard officers, which I refuse to name, saying, no, I have evidence here, and I'll be happy to actually pass this over to the appropriate authorities. If you, just for your information, if you have a look at this company here is the main producer of the beef burgers that came out of Ireland. You can see the information there for yourself. I don't want you to repeat the name.
No, I'm not going to repeat
because the information that I have is been brought forward by a lot of investigation, a lot of support from various different multi-faith groups that have been working with us to state that we want the authorities to come clean with us. We want them to be open. We're not fighting with them. We see them as our authorities. We see them as our agencies. We would love to work with them and point them in the right direction. Unfortunately, whenever there's monetary values attached to anything, your principles, your beliefs go out the window. And the same has happened here in this industry. Because it is because it's a £1 trillion business, our rights have been overlooked.
We're going to be back straight after this nasheed to talk about this very distressing subject.
رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم سلم نبيا ورسولا رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم سلم نبيا ورسولا.
Assalamu alaikum, you're listening to Unity FM on 93.5. This is the weekly review show with me, Nassar Mahmood, and I have with me Maskeen, my fellow contributor, and I also have Brother Mohammed Saleem from ANSA, who are the Association of Non-Stunned Abattoirs, and we're discussing the incidents of which many people will have heard on the news yesterday, national news, the HFA accredited companies that were found to have pork in halal food, which was to go to prisons, Muslims in prison. Now, apparently HFA have gone on record to say that Muslims are making a mountain out of a molehill, and it was only traces of pork. Now, this information is available on the website, from Meat Info. It's quite sad, Maskeen. I mean, you work in schools.
It's troubling that it's troubling that this issue has come to light because an organisation, i.e. prisons, and the Muslim population within that prison has raised the issue. And had that not happened, how would we have found this information out? Had the scare of a big supermarket selling meat that was impure, how would that issue have risen? And it frightens me, really, if I'm honest. It scares me because when I'm buying my meat or my chicken, I'm thinking twice now. First of all, I had a lot of faith in these organisations to protect us and to look after our interests. But now my confidence is dented, and especially when, I'll be honest, when I go to some organisations, I try to avoid meat now. But especially in schools as well, a lot of the problem I find is that the supply chain is often quite linear. So there's one main supplier, and that's branched off to different organizations. With the meat that was coming in to a well-known supermarket that was from Ireland, and later it emerged that I think there was a well-known food chain that had also said we're not affected. Then on a few days later they were very concerned, saying no, the supply chain is the same. So when food is brought in this way, it's been contaminated. It doesn't matter the packaging on it, there's contamination there. And as Muslims, you know, we believe fundamentally that any dealing with pork, regardless of your religious background, your Muslim sect background, that's a generic theme where everyone will agree that pork or pork extracts, whether it be a few grams or
there's
whether
a
it be,
red line there, basically.
there's a red line.
Yeah.
You know, you're right. There's some things we don't cross. You know, and regardless of your personal beliefs, but it's a shame that the issue, I believe, is still not pressing enough. A massive shame that it's not pressing enough. People are not taking it seriously. I think the Muslim community need to wake up and smell the coffee, as it were, and say, well, this is not acceptable. You know, if this was another religious community, would they be as muted as we are? And that's my view. And in regards to sorry, that's a and in regards to schools, again, the supply chains that we have in schools are similar to the supply chains that the big supermarkets have, that the big restaurants have, and so on. We're not immune to this. You know, I'm not saying that school meat is contaminated or anything, but what I am saying is that the supply chain that comes through is often the same as other places, so we have to be very careful. That's the key message.
If I can touch on that, you'd be happy to know that the Birmingham City Council's 2007 prospectus stated that all procurement would be done
if I can just hold you there, I think the mic's not working properly.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I'll continue. One of the things that the FSA guidance notes, one of the things that they've actually commented on, and what their enforcement officers will be looking at is all these guidance, and they state in their own notes, to be halal, no pork or pork ingredients must be present in halal food. Now that might be a given to us, but it's very, very damning in that way.
The guidance notes are very clear on what halal is. Coming back to what I was saying, you mentioned schools, you mentioned colleges. Now, the issue that we've got, we're lucky that in 2007, the Birmingham City Council's prospectus, in consultation with the Central Mosque and a number of other mosque committees, agreed that all procurement to Birmingham City Council's education departments would be done. Now, that was 2007. I've had personal involvements where my child attends one of the local schools here, and because I do a lot of work on halal, she's quite aware of which certification agencies do what. One day she was in the canteen and she noticed a certification agency's logo on there, and she raised the question, and that is not halal. So what the school did was take that certification off and put another one on.
Disgraceful.
So we said, I spoke to the headmaster, and who refused to comment on this, is that certification does not make the product halal. It's a method and the process that renders the meat to be halal.
Of course.
Now, there's ignorance all the way through the supply chain. The company that distributes all of these to multiples, colleges, hospitals, even the armed forces, is a company called 3663. Now, some of these products are our company's own brand name, so it's difficult for us as a community to investigate, research, and find out. Again, this is what I lead back to. It's the authorities that need to do this for us. We are all at risk. That food happens to end up in pies, within our school systems, within some of the takeaways. It's a can of worms that's been opened up here. Yet, how many elected members, apart from Nassar Mahmood recently raised the question in the House of Lords, and I feel that this is a question not for the sake of the Muslims. This question should be asked on behalf of all consumers.
Of course.
Not just us.
Okay.
So it's an important issue that we need to start asking the questions: are we legally protected by our food standards agencies or local authorities?
Now, we will be discussing this in depth on the Friday Night Fusion show at 7 p.m. on Friday, and we will be having our very own Ahmad Bostan interviewing the president of the Halal Food Authority on his show, with other guests, talking about the traces of pork DNA being found in prison halal food. So that's something to look forward to this Friday at 7 p.m. That's the Friday Night Fusion show. Now, just a quick announcement. Look out for an upcoming exhibition at Central Mosque at the end of March. We'll be giving you more details about it very shortly. And it's about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's a chance to know who the Prophet Muhammad is, and apparently this exhibition, which is going to be staged there, is going to be open to non-Muslims. There's about 1 million leaflets being printed, lots of marketing going to happen, and it's going to be a chance for non-Muslims to come to Central Mosque and actually learn about the Prophet Muhammad. And I think this particular time of year, we really need to get our eye on the ball, as Maskeen would say, and concentrate on who the Prophet Muhammad was, and try to get that message across to the wider society. And this one is going to be called The Way of Muhammad. Now, we're heading up towards an ad break, and when we come back, we'll be talking more about this, and also we'll be meeting some people from the Blind Association and talking to them about their new project. Assalamu alaikum, you're listening to Unity FM on 93.5. My name is Nassar Mahmood, and this is the weekly review show, and we're talking about the incidents of traces of pork being found in halal food, which was destined for HMP prisons. And we have in the studio with us Mohammed Saleem from ANSA, the Association of Non-Stunned Abattoirs. Mohammed Saleem, the whole meat industry, it seems to be in a mess. I mean, some people say that if the Food Standards Agency was to really look into this, possibly 75% of the food out there.
I totally agree with you. If they were to adhere to these guidelines which they issued in 2003, 75% of the doubtful meat and chicken especially would be removed from the industry overnight.
Wow.
Weakness is not Food Standard Agency. Weakness is on us. We are not demanding. It is supply and demand. This is why we say you are what you eat, and we educate people, create awareness. For example, you didn't know that when you go to your butchers, if you ask for halal, no Muslim butcher will admit to you that he's going to sell you haram. Agreed? So what you do under this protection of the law, which is governed by the 1968 Trade Misdescriptions Act, you ask them for non-stun. Or if you prefer the stun, you ask them for stun. Then if they give you something else, you take off them, take the receipt and inform the authorities. I will not advise anybody to argue or say any bad words. Let the law do its job. We did a small campaign during the month of Ramadan, and as a result of that, we didn't point fingers at any one business that was doing that. It's not our responsibility. Allah knows best. We armed the consumers, as a result of which it is evident here in Birmingham, 6 major suppliers were picked up. Their mobile phones, their invoices, their computers were taken away. A synchronized raid by the Birmingham City Council, Environmental Health, West Midlands Police did the raids, and they took away X amount of chicken. Now here's another issue now. We have a lot of chicken coming out from Europe. A lot of that rubbish is being dumped here. Then it's being produced in the UK, so they lose the European ID of it and pick up the UK ID. And it is labelled and sold as halal. We need to move away from, if a certificate says it's halal, it's halal. No. If the law says it's halal and it conforms to the guidelines, it is halal. Then the role of the certification agencies come in. I'll give you an example which you've cited. Unfortunately, without mentioning the name, one particular certification agency, I believe that they've lost the plot. How dare they say that the Muslims are making a mountain out of a molehill? The fact of the matter is, as a Muslim, you ask a 5-year-old child and the child will say, Muslims are prohibited from coming anywhere near pork. Now, is that making a mountain out of a molehill? If I gave you poison and you didn't know about it, would you live? Would that poison be different? That is what pork is to Muslims. So coming back, it is up to us to inform, educate, and especially inform our mothers and sisters, because they are the ones who, according to the research which came out in 2010, visit the supermarkets 3 times a week. They will buy fresh meat, freeze it, but they will not buy frozen meat, we're told.
True.
It is our sisters that need to take it on themselves, that if you want your future generation to do halal things, you have to feed them halal. So you are what you eat, is what we say. And yes, we are an industry organization, but we've taken it upon ourselves to create awareness. You will not hear me say, buy from this member who is selling this. You will hear me say time and time after. I've been to France, Germany. Time and time after, I'm saying to people, ask for what is close to your heart, and that is the prophetic method of halal, which is non-stun by default.
And by the way, the Old Testament actually, categorically says that thou shalt not eat the flesh of the swine. So it's nothing new. It's all there.
It's crossfades.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, you were going to say, Mohammed?
No, followers of Jesus, peace be upon him. We know him as a prophet. The Christian brothers or Christian colleagues see him as a son of God. That's their belief. His last meal was halal, kosher. Can anybody deny that? We are following the sunnah of the Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him. Then endorsed by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The greatest teacher that the human race has ever seen. Mercy for all mankind and animal.
Okay, now, Maskeen, you talked about how schools are vulnerable to this sort of thing because the supply chains are there supplying the schools as well.
Sure.
Maskeen, is there anything that people can do to be more aware of what their children are eating in schools?
I think, one of the things you need to do really is like what Muhammad said previously, is I think his daughter went into school and saw a label. Now, mashallah, she's obviously well educated, well versed in knowing what's halal, what's not halal, what labels to look out for. I think just get yourself informed, and ask the school, okay, where's your supply chain? Don't just take someone's word for it. I've got a friend of mine, I won't name his name on air, but mashallah, whenever we go to restaurants, he embarrasses me sometimes and says, look, is this meat halal? And he'll ask the manager. And now I think back on him and I say, well, this man, mashallah, he's been making the right decisions. So I think the key is, it's not that we don't trust whether meat's halal or not. It's for our own assurance and for our own ability to have that correct information. So the key is to go back to schools, talk to the head, say, look, exactly where is this meat from? Can I see the certificate? Can I see a copy of it? Can I look at your kitchens? How do you prepare any meat in-house? Can I see that? And I'm sure that most schools will be willing to at least give you the information and advise you accordingly. Regarding, I'd like to bring Muhammad into this if I can. What else can we do as consumers? What can we do?
As consumers, I think where the real issue is, and this is again investigated, our organizations like HMC would endorse this, is that majority of the contamination happens because of part production. We're encouraging businesses who want to supply the Muslim community to dedicate their businesses to one source. Do not do part production, because accidents do happen and the non-halal ends up in the halal market. We are advising the likes of HMC, the likes of HFA, it is time that you actually dedicated this to the dedicated non-stun or dedicated halal producers. Thereby, none of these contaminations of different DNAs coming into it. It will solve the problem. I'm again pleading with lot
I'd
of
just like to state that the HMC were not at fault in this. It was the HFA that was actually outed as
the issue here again, without knocking anybody. If you speak to HFA, they will say, no, HMC were at fault. We looked at their certification and we didn't investigate it.
But HFA has been around a long time. HFC relatively is much
has
newer
done a lot more good.
and more stricter in their requirements.
If you were to ask me which one would I go with, I will happily work with HMC. Why? Because their principles are in the right place. Yes, things do go wrong now and again, and it is up to us to work together.
I think this is why we need to talk amongst ourselves and try to get some kind of consensus as to how to go forward. I think we're going to have to cut it short here. And as I said, Friday we will have the president of the HFA, which is the Halal Food Authority, and this is the authority that certificated the food that was found to have traces of pork in it. He will be interviewed by Ahmed Bostan on Friday Night Fusion, so that's something to look out for. And we're going to be back straight after this, Nasheed, and we're going to be talking to people from Action for the Blind People. Just lastly, if Mohammed Saleem...
Can I first of all thank you for allowing me to come on and share this information. The important information that I would like to put out into the community is that the recent press release is coming out from all mosques and centres across the UK is to state that ban or boycott all products that actually have HFA certification on there, and I can openly say Birmingham Central Mosque, I can openly say Lancashire Council of Mosques, I can openly say Gumgol Sharif have been...
Is this confirmed?
This is confirmed in the media at the moment. It is open public domain that letters have gone off to open letters to HFA to come clean and justify why they have single-handedly brought the halal industry into the disrepute. On that note, brother, I would like to say thank you very much and assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for coming in, and we'll be back straight up.